Vance Thorne had built his empire on absolute control. Every variable, every risk, every person in his life was carefully calculated. He was the chief executive of Thorne Global, a man who moved billions with a single signature and ruined his rivals with a cold, unforgiving gaze. When his board of directors demanded he soften his ruthless, solitary image before finalizing a critical international merger, Vance did what he always did. He acquired an asset. That asset was Juliet Lynn. Juliet was supposed to be simple. They had met through a mutual acquaintance at a charity gala, and she checked every box the corporate public relations team had drawn up. She was a quiet, unassuming gallery assistant during the day, possessing an elegant beauty that looked perfect on magazine covers, but never demanded the spotlight. They entered into a highly confidential arrangement. She would play the role of his devoted, refined girlfriend for 6 months, and in exchange, he would pay off the crushing debts left behind by her late father. It was a clean transaction. No emotions, no surprises. Until the night the illusion shattered. The rain was pouring heavily over the city when Vance left a tense negotiation with his fiercest rival, Dorian Black. Dorian had spent the entire evening making subtle, mocking remarks about Vance's sudden domesticity, probing for weaknesses. Irritated and restless, Vance decided to skip his usual route back to his penthouse. He instructed his driver to take the back roads through the industrial district, needing the quiet of the empty streets to clear his mind. As the sleek black car glided past abandoned warehouses and flickering streetlights, Vance caught sight of a familiar figure slipping through the rusted metal door of a notorious underground club. He ordered the driver to stop immediately. His heart hammered in his chest, a rare spike of adrenaline flooding his veins. The woman wore a tight black leather jacket, her hair pulled back into a messy utilitarian knot. It could not be Juliet. His Juliet was currently at his penthouse, likely reading a book by the fireplace, sipping the expensive chamomile tea his staff prepared for her. But Vance Thorne never ignored a discrepancy. He stepped out of the car into the freezing rain and walked toward the heavy steel door. The air inside was thick with smoke, cheap whiskey, and the heavy thud of bass. It was an illegal gambling ring, a place where fortunes were lost in seconds, and the city's worst predators gathered to hide their sins. Vance moved through the shadows, his tailored suit completely out of place, his cold eyes scanning the room until they locked onto the center table. There she was, Juliet. She was not wearing the modest pastel dresses he bought for her. She was dealing cards with lightning speed, her eyes sharp, her posture commanding. A massive, heavily tattooed man slammed his fist on the table, leaning in to threaten her over a lost hand. Vance took a step forward, his muscles tensing to intervene, but he stopped dead in his tracks. Juliet did not flinch. She leaned across the green felt, her voice cutting through the noise of the room like a blade. She told the man in a tone so dangerously calm it sent a chill down Vance's spine, that if he did not remove his hands from her table, she would ensure he left the building without them. The man swallowed hard, backed away in silence, and the game resumed as if nothing had happened. Vance watched from the darkness, his mind racing. This was not the timid girl who kept her head down at his high society dinners. This was a woman who knew how to survive in the absolute worst conditions. The anger that flared inside him over her deception was quickly overshadowed by an intense burning curiosity. He waited outside in the freezing alleyway. 2 hours later, the heavy metal door creaked open, and Juliet stepped out into the damp night, counting a thick wad of cash under the glow of a broken street lamp. "I pay you enough to buy this entire city block," Vance said. His voice echoed in the narrow alley, deep and dangerous. Juliet froze, the cash still in her hand. She turned slowly to face him. There was no fear in her eyes, no desperate attempt to explain herself. She simply lifted her chin, the soft, submissive mask she wore for him completely gone. "You pay me to smile at your investors, Vance," she said, her voice completely steady. "What I do on my own time is none of your business." Vance closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, towering over her. The scent of rain and cheap smoke clung to her, a sharp contrast to the expensive perfume he usually associated with her. "Everything you do is my business, Juliet," he murmured, his dark eyes locked onto hers. "We have a contract that strictly forbids you from associating with anything that could jeopardize my reputation. If the press found out the pristine girlfriend of the Thorn Empire was running cards in a dirty basement, the merger would collapse tomorrow. Then fire me, she challenged, taking a step closer instead of retreating. Tear up the contract. Tell the board we had a tragic breakup. I do not need your money, Vance. I never asked for your charity. I only took your deal because it was the fastest way to clear my father's name before the banks took our family home. Vance looked at her closely. He noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the deep exhaustion she was desperately trying to hide behind her fierce pride. She was working herself to the bone, living a double life just to survive, while rejecting the luxury he had placed at her feet. She was not a gold digger. She was a survivor. I am not firing you, Vance said softly, his tone shifting into something far more possessive. But the rules have just changed. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray lock of damp hair away from her face. Juliet's breath hitched at the unexpected tenderness, a stark contrast to his usual cold demeanor. From now on, you do not step foot in a place like this again, he commanded, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. You belong to my world now, Juliet, and I protect what is mine. Tomorrow, you are moving out of your apartment. You are coming to live with me. Juliet let out a bitter laugh, batting his hand away. I am not your property, Vance, and I will not be another shiny trophy you keep locked up in a penthouse. It is no longer a request, he replied, his gaze darkening as the rain continued to pour around them. Dorian Black was asking questions about you tonight. He suspects our relationship is a sham. If he digs deep enough and finds out about this place, he will not just ruin me. He will destroy you to get to me. I am not going to let that happen. Juliet stared at him, the weight of his words settling heavily between them. The fragile wall she had built to keep him at a distance was cracking. For the first time since they signed their names on that dotted line, she realized she had no idea who the real Vance Thorn was. And more terrifyingly, she realized he was the only person standing between her and total ruin. The transition into Vance Thorn's world was swift and absolute. Within 24 hours, Juliet's modest belongings were moved into his sprawling, glass-walled penthouse overlooking the city. To the outside world, she was the pampered future bride of a billionaire. Inside the penthouse, the silence between them was thick with unresolved tension. Vance had filled a walk-in closet with designer gowns, diamond jewelry and silk loungewear, expecting her to seamlessly adapt to her new role. Instead, Juliet wore her own faded, oversized sweaters, walking barefoot across his cold marble floors, stubbornly refusing to let his wealth erase her identity. Their mornings became a quiet battlefield. Vance would sit at the long dining table, hidden behind financial reports, while Juliet drank her coffee, observing him with a piercing gaze that made him deeply uncomfortable. You have built an empire out of glass, Vance, she told him one morning, pushing away a plate of expensive imported fruit she had not asked for. You control everything and everyone, but you have no one you actually trust. Your entire life is just a balance sheet, and you are terrified of what happens when the numbers do not add up. Vance tightened his grip on his coffee cup, his knuckles turning white. He wanted to snap back, to remind her of her place, but her words struck a nerve he had spent years trying to bury. He simply stood up, adjusted his immaculate tie, and left for the office without a word. But Juliet's grueling double life had taken its toll. Days later, the sheer exhaustion of her past months caught up with her, and a sudden violent fever swept over her. Vance returned home to find her shivering on the sofa, her face pale and damp with sweat. For a man who never deviated from his schedule, Vance did the unthinkable. He cancelled a multi-million-dollar strategy meeting. He dismissed his staff and spent the entire night sitting by her side. When Juliet briefly opened her eyes in the early hours of the morning, she found the most ruthless man in the city, gently wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, placing a fresh cup of chamomile tea on the nightstand. It was brewed exactly the way she liked it, a detail she had never spoken aloud. He had simply noticed. That fragile moment of tenderness shattered the very next afternoon. While Juliet was recovering, Vance's head of security handed him a confidential dossier. Vance had ordered a deep dive into the debts Juliet's father had left behind, intending to quietly pay off the remaining creditors to ensure Dorian Black could never use them against her. As Vance read the first page, the air in the room grew freezing cold. The debt did not come from gambling or bad investments. Her father's manufacturing company had been the target of a hostile takeover 5 years ago. It was systematically dismantled, its assets liquidated, and its founder driven to ruin. The company that executed the takeover was Thorn Global. Vance's own signature was at the bottom of the liquidation order. When Juliet walked into the study, still weak from her fever, Vance dropped the file onto the heavy mahogany desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Did you know?" he asked, his voice completely void of emotion, which was far more terrifying than his anger. "Did you know who I was when you signed that contract to be my girlfriend? Was this your plan all along? To infiltrate the life of the man who destroyed your family?" Juliet looked at the file, the color draining from her face. She did not deny it. She stood tall, though her hands were trembling. "Yes," she whispered, her voice tight with unshed tears. "I knew exactly who you were. You were the monster who ruined my father. When the opportunity came to take your money, to bleed you just a fraction of what you bled from us, I took it. But the real tragedy, Vance, is that I spent all these months trying to hate you, only to realize that you are just a lonely, broken man who hurts people, because it is the only way you know how to survive." The truth hung between them, agonizing and heavy. Vance turned his back to her, staring out at the city skyline. "Leave the room, Juliet," he commanded softly. For the next week, the penthouse felt like a tomb. Vance enforced a silent, brutal distance. He slept in the guest wing. They attended public galas, smiling for the cameras, his hand resting perfectly on the small of her back. But the moment the car doors closed, the silence returned. Yet his subtle protection remained. He silently blacklisted the underground clubs so she could never return, and he quietly funneled anonymous funds into a trust for her remaining family members. He could not give her his heart, so he tried to give her safety. But safety was an illusion. While Vance was out of the country securing the final signatures for his merger, Dorian Black made his move. Dorian ambushed Juliet outside her favorite quiet cafe. He did not bring threats of physical violence, he brought photographs. He tossed a manila envelope onto her table. Inside were crystal-clear pictures of Juliet dealing cards in the illegal underground club, alongside documents proving she had entered a paid contractual relationship with Vance Thorn. Dorian smiled, a cold reptilian expression. "The board of directors votes on Vance's merger on Friday night at the Grand Gala," Dorian said, leaning in. "If they see these, the merger dies, and Vance loses control of his own company. You are going to attend that gala, Juliet. You are going to walk up to the microphone, announce that Vance Thorn paid you to be his escort, and then you are going to walk out. If you refuse, I release everything to the global press, and I will make sure the police investigate that little underground casino you love so much. The choice is yours. Ruin his empire or ruin yourself." The Grand Gala was a dazzling display of wealth and influence, held in the sprawling ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the sea of investors and board members who held the fate of Thorn Global in their hands. Vance stood near the front, outwardly projecting absolute confidence, but his eyes constantly scanned the crowd. He knew something was wrong. Juliet had been unusually quiet on the ride over, her posture rigid, her hands clutching her silk purse with white-knuckled desperation. When the chairman of the board called Vance to the stage to give his final address before the merger vote, Juliet suddenly broke away from his side. She walked past him, stepping directly up to the microphone. A heavy silence fell over the ballroom. In the front row, Dorian Black offered a slow, predatory smile, raising his champagne glass in a silent toast to her impending betrayal. Juliet looked out at the sea of expectant faces. Her heart pounded violently against her ribs, but she did not tremble. She looked at Dorian, then turned her gaze to Vance, whose expression had frozen into a mask of pure, calculated stillness. "I was told to come up here tonight and ruin a man," Juliet said, her voice echoing through the massive room. "I was told to tell you all a story of deception, to present photographs and documents that would destroy Vance Thorn's reputation and kill this merger. The man who ordered me to do this is sitting right there." She pointed a steady finger directly at Dorian Black. Gasps rippled through the elegant crowd. Dorian's smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by a pale, panicked realization that he had lost control of his own weapon. He stood up, shouting for security to cut the microphone, claiming the woman was hysterical. But Vance was already moving. He stepped up to the podium, standing shoulder to shoulder with Juliet. He did not pull her away. He did not try to silence her. Instead, he signaled his head of security standing near the audio booth. Suddenly, the ballroom speakers crackled to life, playing a crystal-clear audio recording. It was Dorian's voice, recorded just hours earlier at the cafe, explicitly laying out his blackmail scheme, threatening Juliet, and casually admitting to bribing key officials to sabotage Thorn Global's supply chains over the past year. The silence that followed the recording was absolute and suffocating. Dorian looked around frantically, but the investors he had courted for months were already turning their backs on him in disgust. The board members of the merging company shook their heads, immediately instructing their lawyers to sever all ties with Black Enterprises. Dorian tried to push his way toward the exit, but Vance's security team, accompanied by two quietly waiting detectives, blocked his path. His public downfall was complete, absolute and humiliating. Vance gently placed his hand on the small of Juliet's back, guiding her away from the stage and out of the suffocating ballroom, leaving the chaos behind them. They stepped out onto the quiet, moonlit terrace. The crisp night air swept between them, carrying away the tension of the last few hours. "You knew," Juliet whispered, looking up at him. "You knew he blackmailed me. I have had you followed for your own protection since the day I discovered your father's file," Vance admitted, his voice stripped of all its usual corporate armor. "I knew Dorian approached you. I knew what he demanded. I just did not know what you were going to do when you reached that microphone." "Why did you not stop me?" she asked, tears finally brimming in her eyes. "I could have destroyed everything you built." "Because I deserved it," Vance said softly, taking a step closer. The ruthless billionaire was gone, leaving only a man standing vulnerable before the woman he had wronged. "My company destroyed your family, Juliet. I signed those papers 5 years ago without a second thought because I only cared about the numbers. I was hollow, but you showed me the human cost of my ambition. You refused to be bought. You refused to be intimidated. And you refused to let me stay the monster I was. If you had chosen to tear down my empire tonight, I would have let you do it." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope, identical to the one Dorian had used, but this one was sealed with the heavy wax crest of Thorn Global. He placed it in her hands. "This is not a payoff," Vance said, his voice thick with raw emotion. "This is the deed and complete ownership of your father's manufacturing company. I spent the last week buying back every liquidated asset, every warehouse, every patent. It is entirely yours, free and clear of any debt. It will not bring him back, but it is the first step in making it right." Juliet stared at the envelope, her breath catching in her throat. She looked up at Vance, seeing the desperate sincerity in his dark eyes. He was not trying to control her. He was giving her the freedom to walk away. Instead of turning away, Juliet reached out, her hands trembling as she grabbed the lapels of his jacket, pulling him down into a fierce, desperate kiss. Vance wrapped his arms around her waist, holding her as if she were the only real thing in his carefully constructed world. The months that followed brought a quiet revolution. Juliet did not just take back her father's company. She rebuilt it, breathing new life into the legacy she thought was lost forever. And she did not do it alone. Vance stepped down as the sole dictatorial executive of Thorn Global, taking a position on the board so he could spend his days working alongside Juliet, helping her navigate the complex corporate world with his sharp mind, while she taught him the value of compassion and trust. Their contract had expired long ago, replaced by a partnership built on genuine love and mutual respect. They no longer needed to hide behind masks of indifference. The billionaire who had once calculated every human interaction had finally found the one equation he never wanted to solve, a love that defied all logic and changed him forever. If this story of redemption and true love touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear that even the coldest hearts can be warmed by the right person. Subscribe to our channel to join us for more incredible stories of romance and transformation, and we will see you in the next one.
Vance Thorne and Juliet Lynn's story is a powerful exploration of identity, survival, power, and redemption. At the beginning of the narrative, their relationship is not built on love or trust, but on necessity and strategy. Vance, a billionaire CEO known for his control and ruthless decisions, sees relationships as transactions. Every person around him has a purpose, every action has a calculated result, and every emotion is treated as a weakness. When his company requires a more favorable public image before a major merger, he creates a carefully designed solution, a contract relationship with Juliet Lynn, a woman who appears quiet, elegant, and perfectly suited to play the role of his devoted partner. However, the story quickly reveals that appearances can be deeply misleading. Juliet is not simply a fragile woman accepting financial help. Behind her calm presence is someone who has endured loss, financial pressure, and the responsibility of protecting her family's legacy. Her decision to accept Vance's offer is not motivated by greed, but by survival. She carries the hidden burden of her father's destroyed company and the injustice connected to its downfall. The infographic highlights this contrast between public perception and private reality, showing how both characters are living behind carefully constructed identities. The psychological dynamics between Vance and Juliet reveal two different forms of emotional protection. Vance protects himself through control. His wealth, authority, and intimidating personality create a shield that prevents others from seeing his loneliness and emotional emptiness. He believes that controlling circumstances will prevent pain, but this mindset isolates him from genuine human connection. Juliet, on the other hand, protects herself through resilience. She adapts to different environments, presenting herself as refined in elite social circles while secretly surviving in a dangerous underground world. Her strength comes from experience, determination, and the refusal to allow hardship to define her. The discovery of Juliet's secret life becomes the first major turning point in their relationship. When Vance finds her working in an underground gambling club, he realizes that the woman he thought he understood is far more complex than he imagined. Instead of finding weakness, he discovers courage. This moment forces him to question his own assumptions and begins the transformation of his character. The deeper conflict emerges when Vance discovers that his own company was responsible for destroying Juliet's father's business years earlier. This revelation changes everything. The relationship that began as a business arrangement becomes a confrontation with guilt, responsibility, and the consequences of ambition without compassion. Juliet's anger is justified, but she also recognizes that behind Vance's cold exterior is a man who has never truly faced the human cost of his decisions. The story also explores important social themes, especially the imbalance of power between wealth and vulnerability. Their original contract represents how financial influence can shape personal relationships and create unequal dynamics. The contrast between Vance's luxurious penthouse and Juliet's underground struggles represents the distance between different social realities. The story questions how much of a person's identity is created by their circumstances and how much comes from their choices. Dorian Black's attempt to destroy Vance through Juliet's secret life introduces another important theme: reputation versus truth. In a world where appearances influence business and social status, Dorian believes he can control the narrative by exposing carefully selected information. However, Juliet chooses honesty instead of fear. Her decision at the gala changes the direction of the entire story because she refuses to become a weapon in someone else's revenge. The final stage of the story represents true redemption. Vance does not simply apologize with words, he takes responsibility through action. By restoring Juliet's father's company and returning what was lost, he begins to repair the damage caused by his past decisions. His transformation is not about becoming a different person overnight, but about learning empathy, accountability, and respect. Ultimately, the story teaches that love alone cannot erase injustice. Real change requires courage, honesty, and the willingness to repair the harm created by past actions. Vance and Juliet's journey is not only a romance but also a reflection on human growth. It shows that even people shaped by power, pain, and mistakes can change when they are forced to confront the truth about themselves. Through trust and understanding, two people who began with a contract discover a connection built on something far more meaningful: genuine respect and redemption.